My girlfriend Grace went on a business trip for a week with an intern. Very soon she posted a status update. She was walking along the beach with the intern, their fingers tightly interlaced, overflowing with affection. Many colleagues liked the post and left comments, shouting for them to be together. I also casually tapped like. Later I brought up breaking up with her. She questioned me loudly. "Patrick, I just posted a status update. Is this really such a big deal to you?" Of course it is. Chapter 1. Grace told me she had to go on a last-minute business trip. She would need a whole week before coming back. If it were before, I would definitely keep messaging her nonstop, reminding her to stay safe and watch her schedule. Even though sometimes she complained that I was annoying, she still replied to every message promptly. This business trip was different. This project was originally one I had been following all along, and negotiations were almost finished. According to the general manager's plan, I was supposed to go with her to sign the contract. But Grace suggested that the company should give newcomers more opportunities, and that the intern Anthony should go with her instead. The general manager was about to retire, and Grace was the company's vice president, so naturally he had to give her face. Just like that, Grace ignored my opinion and finalized the arrangements that very day. On the first day of their trip, I felt miserable and held myself back from contacting her all day. By nightfall, I still couldn't resist and called her. But the voice on the other end of the phone belonged to the intern Anthony. "She's taking a shower. Do you want me to have her call you back later?" I said nothing and hung up. The next day Grace posted another status update. She and Anthony were holding hands, strolling along the beach. Under the glow of the setting sun, the scene looked especially beautiful. The tenderness in Grace's eyes was almost spilling out. Looking at the photo, my emotions were extremely complicated. Many colleagues liked and commented, cheering that they were a perfect match and should be together. I also liked it. They do look quite compatible. Grace's call came through almost immediately. "Patrick, what do you mean by that? It's just a photo together, isn't it? Is it really necessary for you to make such a sarcastic comment? Do you know that because of your comment, Anthony is in a really bad mood? You have to apologize to him." Before she could finish, I hung up the phone. Chapter 2. I stood on the balcony, lit a cigarette, and took a deep drag. My 7-year relationship with Grace replayed vividly in my mind, flashing back like scenes from a movie. Back in college, she was the universally acknowledged campus beauty. At the time, a local thug outside the school harassed her every few days. Once, her best friend organized a karaoke gathering. Halfway through the singing, the thug barged in with a group of people. Her best friend made an excuse to go to the restroom and slipped away, leaving Grace alone inside. I walked out of the neighboring private room to use the bathroom and vaguely heard Grace screaming. I rushed in immediately. I saw the thug forcing Grace into the corner of the sofa, her eyes filled with terror. With a grim expression, I grabbed a beer bottle from the table and smashed it over him. With a loud bang, liquor and glass exploded everywhere. The thug's head split open instantly, blood pouring out. He clutched his head and collapsed to the floor. The friends he brought with him rushed over when they saw that. I stood firmly in front of Grace, shielding her. The fight was extremely intense. I was covered in injuries from head to toe. It wasn't until security rushed in that we were finally pulled apart. I felt like all the bones in my body had fallen apart, gasping for air. Grace was curled up on the sofa, trembling all over. From that day on, my relationship with Grace became subtle. She often took the initiative to chat with me. She would also invite me out to eat from time to time. Whenever she left campus, she would ask me to go with her. She said that as long as I stood by her side, she felt safe. Back then, there was light in the way she looked at me. That was how we got together. She followed me around like a shadow all day long. At that time, every piece of clothing I wore, including socks and underwear, was bought by Grace. My classmates were insanely jealous. Of course, on every holiday, she also received carefully prepared gifts from me. From college to the workplace, we were together for 7 years. I still remember the moment when we crossed the final line. She held me tightly, crying as she said we had to be together for a lifetime. I nodded solemnly in agreement. Okay. Chapter 3. After graduating from college, she and I entered the same company as interns. My pampering of her only increased. I bent over backward to please her. She was picky with food, so I spent a lot of time and effort cooking dishes she liked. When she was in a bad mood, I took her on trips during every holiday to help her unwind. I tried every possible way to make her happy and feel loved. I never expected that after 7 years of giving her my all, what I would get in return was such a ruthless betrayal. And that in turn wasn't innocent either. Since that was the case, they might as well be locked together for good. A week later, Grace returned from her business trip and didn't make a fuss. Instead, she tossed me a gift box. Every time she felt guilty toward me, she would casually buy a small present as compensation. In the past, I would have been all smiles. But this time, my face was completely cold. I opened the gift box. Inside was nothing more than a rather cheap tie. Just yesterday, I had seen the intern showing off an expensive suit on his WeChat moments, saying he was grateful to Vice President Grace for the gift and felt extremely flattered. This cheap tie was obviously a free giveaway. So Grace had taken something Anthony didn't even want and used it to brush me off. I closed the gift box and nodded lightly. Thanks. Grace looked surprised at my indifferent reaction, but she still said patiently, "You didn't bother me much during this business trip. That's rare. Consider this your reward." After 1 year at the company, Grace and I were both promoted to supervisors. Now, I was still just a supervisor, while Grace had become my superior, the company's vice president. The balance between us gradually tipped. She grew colder toward me and increasingly impatient. At home, Grace often spoke to me in this condescending tone, which made me extremely uncomfortable. If it weren't for me, could she have entered White Horse Company and become vice president? The general manager was about to retire and had practically let go of company affairs. During the time Grace was away on business, everything in the company fell on my shoulders. I was mentally drained worrying about Grace while also handling matters big and small at the company. These past few days, I was truly exhausted. I didn't feel like continuing the fake politeness with her anymore. I have work tomorrow. I'm going to sleep. Before Grace could say anything, I casually tossed the gift box with the tie onto the nightstand. Just as I was about to lie down, Grace suddenly exploded in anger and yelled at me. "Patrick, I kindly bought you a tie and this is your attitude. Chapter 4. I looked at her in disappointment. Grace, you buy Anthony an expensive suit and give me a free tie he doesn't want. What kind of attitude do you expect from me? Grace's expression instantly turned awkward, though it quickly disappeared. She looked at me and snorted coldly. So what? Anthony just started working. What's wrong with me buying him a suit? What do you have to nitpick about? Her tone was full of impatience and entitlement. In her mind, it seemed I was simply supposed to accept all of this. I let out a cold laugh. Ha! Giving me something others look down on and still asking what I'm being picky about. You really are such a great girlfriend. Grace's ambiguity with Anthony hadn't started recently. Anthony often stayed in her office for half the day, the two of them coming and going together, openly flirting at the company. She also came home later and later. The scent of men's cologne on her made me nauseous. Some colleagues had even started a private betting pool, guessing when Vice President Grace would finally kick me aside. Patrick, what exactly do you mean? Grace, do you remember the first time we slept together? I said quietly, my voice calm. You said we would be together for a lifetime and I agreed. I thought we would keep walking forward happily just like before. But now it seems that was all just wishful thinking on my part. People do change in the end. Grace was dazed for a moment, then quickly frowned. Patrick, what are you trying to say? Break up. I looked at her, my voice ice cold. I'm informing you, not asking for your consent. Now get out, I'm going to sleep. With that, I directly pushed her out of the master bedroom and locked the door behind me. I moved so fast that Grace didn't even have time to react. After I locked the door, she finally flew into a rage, slamming on the door nonstop from outside. Her reaction didn't surprise me at all. After all, I used to put her feelings first in everything. How would I ever dare treat her like this? She was the high and mighty vice president of the company. If there was going to be a breakup, it should have been her who said it first, right? Grace, going crazy outside the door, looked nothing like a vice president now. She was nothing more than a shrew. Clearly, Grace realized this too. After making a scene for a few minutes, she finally quieted down. Standing outside the door, she said coldly, "All you ever do is get jealous. Don't you ever get tired of it? If you were even half as sensible as Anthony, we wouldn't be in this situation." I shouted back through the door, "Get the hell out." After that, I wrapped myself in the blanket and went to sleep. Maybe I really had been too exhausted these past few days. Before I knew it, I had fallen fast asleep. Chapter 5. The next morning, I got up and opened the bedroom door. Grace was already gone. When I arrived at the company, I immediately saw a few colleagues who never really got along with me loudly gossiping. When they noticed me coming in, they didn't bother to lower their voices at all. Do you think Vice President Grace and Anthony did something while they were on that business trip? The WeChat post basically made it official already. What's there to guess? Exactly. They were already eyeing each other at the company. A lonely man and woman, sparks flying. So did Vice President Grace and Supervisor Patrick actually break up or not? Even if they haven't, it's probably only a matter of days. Supervisor Patrick may be strong professionally, but what's the use? Anthony Morales is the son of President Morales from the group headquarters. People climb upward, everyone knows that. Right. Once the general manager retires, it was going to be Vice President Grace taking over anyway. Now that she's hooked up with young Master Morales, it looks like that vice title is about to disappear. I ignored them and walked in calmly, my expression unchanged. But in my mind, I carefully noted down every single one of their names. Just as I entered my office, Simon walked in, his face full of indignation. Supervisor Patrick, everyone's saying Vice President Grace is going to break up with you and get together with that intern Anthony. They're also saying she'll soon become the company's general manager. Is it true? Simon was someone I had personally mentored. He graduated from a top university and had outstanding professional skills. He was already more than capable of handling things on his own. Yet after nearly 2 years at the company, he still hadn't even made it to team leader. After Grace became vice president, almost everyone she promoted was from her own circle. Most of the people on my side were still stuck at the bottom, working like beasts of burden. I could easily imagine that if Grace really became general manager, the people I had trained would probably never see the light of day. I smiled at Simon and spoke with certainty. Simon, Vice President Grace and I broke up last night. But the general manager position won't be hers. Simon had followed me for a long time and held a somewhat blind faith in me. Although most people in the company believed that Grace would take the top spot, after hearing me say this, there wasn't the slightest doubt on his face. He knew that I never spoke lightly about things I wasn't sure of. The excitement on his face was impossible to hide. That's great, Supervisor Patrick. Back when you and Vice President Grace were both supervisors, her performance was nowhere near yours. Your ability has always been above hers. I think the general manager's seat should belong to you. I just smiled and said nothing. Simon continued. I should hurry and tell the guys to hang in there a bit longer. You don't know this, but a lot of people downstairs were planning to resign as soon as they heard Grace was going to become general manager. As he spoke, he turned to leave. I quickly grabbed him and reminded him. Remember, don't spread anything recklessly. Just tell them to stay calm. Simon nodded. Don't worry, Patrick. I know what I'm doing. Chapter 6. Simon had barely left when Anthony walked over. He looked at me with blatant provocation in his eyes. Supervisor Patrick, I heard that you and Grace were promoted to supervisor at the same time back then, right? Now Grace is about to become the company's general manager and you're still warming the bench in this position. Do you really think Grace will still have any interest in you by then? I lifted my head and gave him a cold glance. What, are you teaching me how to do my job? Anthony's face instantly paled, anger flashing in his eyes. If you know what's good for you, you should let go already. You're not worthy of Grace at all. I let out a disdainful laugh and looked at him mockingly. She stayed with me for 7 years. I got bored a long time ago. If you like taking out my trash, why don't I just give it to you? I never thought that one day I would demean Grace to such an extent. But ever since I found out about the disgusting things between her and Anthony, I felt nothing but nausea whenever I looked at her. The kid was still young and thin-skinned. A few sharp words from me made his face flush red. He wanted to say more, but my expression darkened. Anthony, remember your status as an intern. Who allowed you to come over here chatting during work hours? If every employee were like you, would this company even be able to operate? Now get the hell out. Anthony was so furious his face turned ashen. He clenched his teeth and said, Patrick, don't be so ungrateful. Grace is about to become general manager. Don't end up losing even your supervisor position. With that, he left in a huff. Not long after, Grace came looking for me. Her expression was especially ugly. Patrick, what right do you have to pick on Anthony? I glanced at her indifferently and leaned lazily back in my office chair. Grace, I just scolded him a bit. What, does it hurt you to see him upset? Her face darkened even further. She planted both hands on my desk and looked down at me from above, her tone carrying barely restrained fury. Patrick, what exactly are you implying? Anthony is just an intern. Why do you have to target him like this? Have you even considered how humiliating this is for him? Chapter 7. I stared at her for a moment, my tone dripping with sarcasm. Humiliating? Grace, have you forgotten how you treated me at the company? Before we even broke up, You were already flirting with Anthony right under everyone's noses, making eyes at him, joking around, even letting him replace me and go on a business trip with you. Did you ever care about how I felt? Did it ever cross your mind how humiliating that was for me? Grace was left speechless by my words, her face flushing red. She bit her lower lip tightly and her tone softened a lot. Patrick, I know you're upset, but Anthony is really just a small-time intern. Don't take your anger out on him. Just a small-time intern? I let out a scornful laugh. Grace, if he were really just a nobody intern, would you even be interested in him? Grace pressed her lips together and stayed silent. But the answer was already obvious. I never imagined that the once innocent Grace would become this calculating and snobbish. When Anthony joined the company, he was personally brought in by Ms. Rowena, the president of the group's headquarters. The entire time, Anthony was linking arms with President Morales. Almost everyone in the company believed Anthony was the president's son. Quite a few people even privately tried to confirm it with him. Anthony neither admitted nor denied it, which only reinforced everyone's suspicions. They all thought that this young Master Morales was just being low-key. On Anthony's first day at the company, Grace even held a grand welcome ceremony for him. The two of them grew closer and closer without ever needing to spell it out. In the end, Grace left without saying another word. After work, I ran into Grace and Anthony again in the parking lot. I was just about to open my car door and get in. Maybe having Grace standing beside him gave Anthony some confidence. He stopped me. Supervisor Patrick, that bracelet on your wrist looks pretty nice. Can I borrow it and wear it for a few days? I replied bluntly. Borrow it if you want? Who the hell do you think you are? A mere intern repeatedly jumping in front of me to provoke me. It seemed I had been far too polite to him. He was instantly furious, his eyes reddening as he turned to look at Grace. Sure enough, Grace's expression darkened. She walked over to me, frowning. Patrick, it's just a stupid bracelet. Anthony likes it. What's wrong with letting him wear it for a few days? Take it off and give it to Anthony. Anthony shot me an extremely smug look. After so many years with Grace, I had rarely refused any of her requests. She probably thought I wouldn't refuse this time either. I simply looked at her with amusement. Why? Grace froze. Yeah, why? The bracelet was my personal property. Not to mention, I had already broken up with her last night. Even if we hadn't broken up, what right did she have to demand that I hand it over? She was momentarily at a loss for words. After a pause, her tone softened again. Patrick, it's not like the bracelet is worth much anyway. It's not as if you won't return it. Not worth much? What if I told you this bracelet is worth $5 million? Would you believe it? Her judgment of things and of people had clearly deteriorated. Sure enough, Grace was stunned by my words. Then the corners of her mouth lifted in mockery. Patrick, are you crazy? This piece of junk is worth $5 million? Anthony laughed along, his eyes full of contempt. Supervisor Patrick, have you been under too much work pressure lately? Maybe you should take a few days off. This bracelet might have diamonds and sapphires and look flashy, but it's still just cheap junk. $5 million? Who are you trying to fool? I couldn't be bothered to argue with two idiots any further. I opened the car door and slammed it shut with a bang. Finally, some peace and quiet. The two of them were still standing there, saying something to each other. I ignored them, stepped on the gas, and sped off. Chapter 8. I returned to the apartment and began packing my things. The place was rented. Since we had already broken up, there was no reason to keep living together. I didn't actually have much to pack. A single suitcase was enough to hold everything I owned. Just as I was about to leave, Grace came back. She looked at me holding the suitcase, her expression complicated. Perhaps neither of us had ever imagined that we would end up like this. As we brushed past each other, she still reached out and stopped me. Patrick, whether you believe me or not, I really didn't do anything to betray you. Our relationship has already come to an end. There's no reason for me to lie to you. I looked down at her and let out a cold laugh. Grace, betrayal doesn't only count if you've slept together. Ever since Anthony joined the company, the two of you have been glued to each other every day. He's all you see. Hugging, clinging to each other, holding hands and strolling along the beach. Don't you think that counts as betrayal? Her face grew darker and darker. I continued. Grace, you're no longer some naive girl who just stepped into society. You know very well that if a man gets something too easily, he'll never truly cherish it. Even if you didn't cross the final line, weren't you deliberately stringing him along? The moment those words left my mouth, Grace exploded with rage. Patrick, what are you trying to say? I'm telling you, if it weren't for the years we spent together, I would have broken up with you long ago. I'm about to become the company's general manager and you're still just a small-time supervisor. We're no longer from the same world. What makes you think I'd keep living with someone like you, who has no ambition at all? I felt nothing but deep disappointment toward her. Oh, so today you're finally saying what you really think, huh? She had found a bigger backer now and couldn't wait to kick me aside. So time really can completely change a person. Or maybe this was Grace's true face all along. My calm attitude only fueled her anger further. She practically roared. That's right. You're completely unworthy of me now. What kind of future could I possibly have with you? If you're going to leave, then get the hell out already. I didn't look at her again. Dragging my suitcase, I slammed the door shut and walked out. I returned to the villa where I used to live. Letting go of everything related to Grace, I suddenly felt lighter than ever before. I no longer drained myself emotionally over her. I no longer worried about what time she'd come home at night. I didn't have to wake up early every morning to carefully prepare a loving breakfast for her. In the evenings, I could go out for drinks with a few old friends. A few days later, I suddenly realized that life without her could be far more relaxed and far more wonderful. Chapter 9. That day, I arrived at the company. As I passed by Grace's office, I saw Anthony sitting in Grace's office chair. Grace stood beside him, smiling brightly as she peeled lychees. After peeling them, she personally fed them into Anthony's mouth. As Anthony ate, he glanced at me from the corner of his eye, a meaningful smile curling at his lips. Perhaps there was too much juice, the lychee juice spilled from the corner of his mouth. Grace hurriedly pulled out a tissue and wiped his mouth for him. Anthony stared straight at me, his eyes full of provocation. The next second, he suddenly leaned in close to Grace's ear and whispered a few words. Only then did Grace lift her eyes and glance at me. Her expression stiffened for a moment. She hurried over and pulled the blind shut. During this period of time, there had been quite a bit of talk in the company that I might be the next general manager. Of course, the vast majority of people scoffed at the rumor. After all, by rank alone, it should naturally be Vice President Grace moving up. What's more, Vice President Grace had gotten together with young Master Morales. Her taking the general manager's seat was basically a done deal. I wasn't surprised at all that such rumors existed. Simon definitely wouldn't spread them. But people at lower levels were bound to let something slip sooner or later. Grace, however, panicked. With a rather unpleasant expression, she pushed open the door to my office. A trace of hesitation flashed in her eyes before she finally spoke. Patrick, could you resign from your job, for my sake? I was stunned on the spot. How shameless did one have to be to say something like that out loud? I sneered. Why should I? She frowned, but still spoke patiently. Patrick, we've already broken up. Still working in the same company, seeing each other every day. Don't you find that awkward? I laughed. No, you're the one who betrayed this relationship. If you don't find it awkward, why should I? A hint of anger crept into her tone. Patrick, haven't you heard what our colleagues have been saying about our relationship lately? If this continues, it'll be bad for both of our reputations. Just consider it for my sake. We've already broken up and I'm supposed to consider things for you. Wasn't that ridiculous? During this time, the mess between Grace and me had indeed become a favorite topic of gossip among colleagues. A lot of it was mocking and sarcastic toward me. Of course, there were also some people who openly disapproved of Grace's actions, thinking she was far too opportunistic. Even a few colleagues who used to be fairly close to her had started speaking less favorably about her behind her back. I looked at her coldly. Grace, what makes you think I'd still consider things for you? If you feel awkward, you're more than welcome to resign yourself. Grace stared at me blankly, disbelief filling her eyes. Maybe I had treated her too well in the past. The current me must have felt utterly unfamiliar to her. I raised an eyebrow at her, half smiling. Grace, don't tell me you're worried that I'll snatch the general manager position from you. Having her thoughts exposed so directly, Grace flew into a rage. Patrick, who the hell do you think you are? By rank, by connections, what do you have that can compare to me? If headquarters wanted to promote you, they would have done it long ago. Why wait until now? And you think you're qualified to compete with me for the general manager's seat? You're not worthy. I looked at her calmly from beginning to end. My composure made her heart tighten for no reason. She didn't linger any longer, turned around, walked out of my office, and slammed the door shut. The reason she lost her composure, when it came down to it, was guilt. After all, my competence was something the entire company acknowledged. Among all the subsidiaries under the group, White Horse Company's ability to consistently outperform the rest, at least half of that success was thanks to me. In Grace's bid for the general manager position, the only person who could truly pose a threat to her was me. Hashtag Chapter 10. Today was President Rodriguez's last day at work as the company's general manager. Tomorrow, he would retire. During this period, most of the company's affairs had basically been handled by Grace and me. After President Rodriguez retired, there actually wouldn't be much work to hand over. Early this morning, President Rodriguez issued a notice to all company staff, saying that Ms. Rowena Morales, president of the headquarters Red Bull Group, would be visiting the company. Everyone could guess what that meant. The birth of the new general manager would be today. I still underestimated just how shameless Grace could be. President Morales hadn't arrived yet. But Grace and Anthony showed up at my office with security guards. Without a word, they ordered the guards to restrain me. My phone and computer were also temporarily confiscated. Grace spoke in a serious tone. Manager Patrick, there's been a leak of company confidential information. According to surveillance records, during this period you were always the last one to leave the company. Your suspicion is the greatest. Please cooperate with the company's investigation. I didn't resist. My disappointment in Grace had already sunk to rock bottom. This move of hers was indeed ruthless. A company confidential information leak. Even without any evidence proving I did it, mere suspicion was already enough. Under normal circumstances, once something like this happened, no matter how outstanding my abilities were, headquarters would never place me in an important position again. As colleagues throughout the company watched me being escorted out of the office by 2 guards, the place instantly exploded. Everyone began discussing it heatedly. I was taken to the conference room. President Rodriguez was also invited in. Grace said solemnly, "President Rodriguez, the company has suffered a confidential information leak. Manager Patrick is the prime suspect. I suggest that Manager Patrick be suspended from duty pending investigation." President Rodriguez had been in the corporate world for decades and could tell at a glance that something fishy might be going on. The confidential leak had occurred several days ago. With retirement approaching, this incident pained him deeply. He had been investigating it over the past few days as well. The confidential files could only be accessed by 3 people in the entire company: me, President Rodriguez, and Grace. However, the access traces had already been completely erased through special means. President Rodriguez didn't want to stir up trouble on his last day. So he tried to smooth things over and said, "Vice President Grace, this matter is extremely serious. We still need to conduct further investigation and cannot jump to conclusions based solely on suspicion. Manager Patrick is also a key member of the company. We can't handle this so hastily. How about this? President Morales will arrive shortly. Let's listen to President Morales' instructions." Grace was clearly dissatisfied with President Rodriguez's evasive approach. She frowned, still wanting to say something. President Rodriguez waved his hand, signaling her not to push the issue further. Grace had no choice but to drop it. She cast me a cold glance, her eyes filled with triumph. Even without taking action, her goal had already been achieved. President Rodriguez received a call. President Morales was almost there. He hurriedly arranged for everyone to wait in the conference room. Then he rushed out to greet her. Hashtag Chapter 11. Company colleagues filed into the conference room one after another. When I was brought in by the security guards, they had already guessed that it was probably related to the confidential information leak from a few days ago. At that moment, discussions broke out everywhere. Many people expressed sympathy for me, thinking I might have been wronged. Of course, quite a few also wore schadenfreude-filled expressions. Several of Grace's trusted followers were practically over the moon, rushing over to flatter her. Grace was in an excellent mood, clearly convinced that the position of general manager was already within her grasp. Simon and several subordinates I had personally trained came over to comfort me. They didn't believe for a second that I would leak company secrets. Seeing the smug look on Grace's face filled them with indignation. I smiled and said to them, "Don't worry. Grace won't become the general manager." Just then, Rowena walked in, followed by a man and a woman. Rowena was in her 50s, but she was very well maintained and looked no older than her early 40s. The man behind her was around 40, his face completely expressionless, yet he carried the faint aura of someone in a position of authority. The other woman looked to be only in her early 20s. But she was stunningly beautiful, her face and figure were flawless. She was even more dazzling than a top-tier celebrity. From the moment they entered, almost all the male colleagues' gazes were unconsciously drawn to her. Naturally, everyone was familiar with her. The #1 secretary of the Red Bull Group, Luviana. Over the past few years, she had always been by Rowena's side. She was practically the dream lover of every talented young man across the entire Red Bull Group and its many subsidiaries. However, she came from a powerful aristocratic family. Although she was beautiful, very few people dared to truly approach her. As Grace watched the radiant Luviana walk in, a deep flash of jealousy crossed her eyes. I could clearly feel Luviana deliberately, or perhaps inadvertently, glancing at me the whole time. Being stared at like that left me somewhat helpless, so I secretly made a silly face at her. Luviana let out a soft laugh. In an instant, the entire conference room seemed much brighter. The previously oppressive atmosphere also eased considerably. This little detail did not escape Grace's notice. Her gaze shifted back and forth between Luviana and me, her expression turning frighteningly dark. Chapter 12. After President Morales took her seat, she slowly scanned the conference room. In the end, her gaze settled on Grace. Vice President Grace, I've heard that the company has recently experienced a confidential information leak. You've been investigating it as well. Have you made any progress? Although President Morales' tone was calm, it carried a hint of coldness. Grace clearly hadn't expected President Morales to question her first. She froze for a moment, then spoke. President Morales, we have preliminarily identified a suspect. Since we lack key evidence, the investigation is still ongoing. President Morales nodded and continued. Who is the suspect? Grace glanced at me and replied. It's manager Patrick. Patrick. According to surveillance records, he has often been the last to leave the company recently, so his suspicion is the greatest. Rowena frowned slightly and turned to look at President Rodriguez. President Rodriguez, what's your view on this matter? President Rodriguez sighed and said, President Morales, this incident is indeed somewhat strange. Manager Patrick is one of the company's core staff and has always performed well. I don't really believe he would do something like this, but it's true that his suspicion is the greatest. This old fox of a man seemed to have expressed an opinion, but in reality, he had said nothing at all. President Morales had no choice but to look at me. Manager Patrick, regarding the leak of company secrets, do you have anything to say? With a playful grin, I replied. President Morales, even if others don't believe me, you believe me, don't you? As soon as those words came out, everyone in the conference room widened their eyes. Grace immediately shouted angrily. Patrick, this is a meeting. What kind of attitude is that, acting all flippant? President Morales waved her hand at Grace, clearly not angry. Manager Patrick, since you are currently the prime suspect, you still need to give everyone an explanation. I swept my gaze across the room and spoke calmly. Who leaked the confidential information? Not only do I know, President Morales actually knew it long ago as well. The moment I said that, everyone looked at one another in confusion. Grace and Anthony, however, turned pale, panic flashing across their faces. I continued. All of our company's office systems have a hidden monitoring function. Of course, during normal daily work, we are not monitored. When they heard the first part, everyone's expressions darkened. Upon hearing that routine work wasn't monitored, their faces eased slightly. It only automatically activates when confidential files are accessed. All browsing records and automatically captured photos are sent directly to headquarters. Grace and Anthony's faces turned deathly white. President Rodriguez cast a few meaningful glances at me. Even he, the general manager, had been unaware of this, so how did I know such details so clearly? Chapter 13. I nodded slightly toward Luviana. Understanding immediately, Luviana projected her phone screen onto the large display. Anthony's face instantly appeared on the screen. Luviana said sternly. During this period, access to the confidential files was normal overall. Only Anthony's access was abnormal. He does not have the qualifications or the clearance to access them at all. And the account Anthony used to access the files belongs to Vice President Grace. As soon as her words fell, the entire room erupted in an uproar. So Grace really was that calculating. She hadn't done it herself, instead letting Anthony do the dirty work. Clearly, she had been betting on the fact that Anthony was President Morales' son. Even if something were discovered, she probably believed it would be quietly brushed aside in the end. But she had miscalculated badly. At this moment, although Grace's face had gone pale, she didn't seem overly panicked. Anthony, on the other hand, was already trembling from head to toe in fear. President Morales looked at Anthony with a face full of disappointment and shouted sharply, Anthony, what do you have to say for yourself now? Anthony shuddered, stood up, then immediately crawled over to Rowena like a dog, begging incessantly. President Morales, I was wrong. I was possessed for a moment and did something so stupid. Please spare me just this once. Everyone in the company looked at one another in confusion. Wasn't Anthony President Morales' son? Even if he had made a mistake, did he really need to be this terrified? Anthony, I sponsored your education for 10 years. After you graduated from college, you found an internship at a company, but you were fired for harassing a female colleague. I gave you chances. That's why I let you enter my company. And this is how you repay me? Is that it? Anthony knelt on the floor, crying as he begged. President Morales, I really know I was wrong. I'm not human. I'm ungrateful. Please spare me one more time. It was Vice President Grace who told me to do it. The entire company was stunned. No one had expected Anthony to be such a piece of trash. He was just a poor student sponsored by President Morales, yet he had pretended for so long to be some spoiled rich second-generation heir. Absolutely disgusting. Grace was completely stunned, murmuring to herself in a low voice. How is this possible? How could it turn out like this? President Morales looked at Anthony in disappointment, then glanced at Grace. Grace, Anthony, from today onward, you are no longer members of my Red Bull group. I reserve the right to pursue legal responsibility against both of you. Grace's face turned ashen, her expression one of utter despair. As for Grace's former confidants, each of them hung their heads, not daring to look up. Next, I will announce 2 appointments. First, Sean, standing behind me, will serve as General Manager of White Horse Company, a subsidiary of the Red Bull Group. Second, Patrick will serve as Vice President of the Red Bull Group. As soon as the 2 appointments were announced, the entire room fell silent. Everyone was so shocked that they couldn't say a single word. Chapter 14. Grace was instantly overwhelmed with rage. She suddenly stood up and shouted, President Morales, I have no objections to the punishment you've given me. But Patrick, he's nothing more than a minor manager of a subsidiary. On what grounds does he deserve to become a group vice president? Rowena looked at Grace with a complicated expression. There was disappointment, but also a trace of pity. Because he is my only son. And in the future, this position of president will also belong to him alone. What? Do you still have objections? The moment President Morales finished speaking, the entire conference room once again fell into deathly silence. All eyes turned toward me. Confusion, shock, excitement, envy, jealousy. All kinds of complex emotions intertwined in the air. Grace's eyes widened. She stared at me in disbelief. Her lips trembled uncontrollably, yet she couldn't utter a single word. Only at this moment did she finally realize just how absurdly foolish a mistake she had made. My family in City A used to be a wealthy, powerful family as well. But 12 years ago, we went bankrupt. My father sank into despair and never managed to recover. He vented his anger at home every single day. My mother couldn't take it anymore and chose to divorce him. Over the course of 12 years, my mother single-handedly founded the Red Bull Group with more than 20 subsidiaries under its umbrella. By now, its total assets were about to surpass the 100 billion mark. When I graduated from university, I told my mother about my relationship with Grace. She strongly opposed it and forced me into a political marriage, insisting that I marry Luviana. Luviana and I were childhood sweethearts. From elementary school through high school, we were almost inseparable. Even after my family went bankrupt, Luviana still stayed by my side. When it came time for university, she went abroad, and only then were we separated. By the time I graduated from college, Grace and I were deeply in love. I couldn't bring myself to abandon her and marry another woman. I had a huge argument with my mother. In the end, she had no choice but to take a step back and stop interfering with my relationship with Grace. On one condition, both Grace and I had to join the White Horse Company. She gave me 3 years. During those 3 years, I was not allowed to tell Grace my true identity. After 3 years, if I still insisted on marrying Grace, she would no longer oppose it. At first, I didn't understand my mother's little scheme. Until she clearly knew that my performance was better than Grace's, yet still promoted Grace to vice general manager. She said that in a relationship, if you want to see a woman's true nature, you have to see what happens when her status becomes higher than her partner's. If she can still remain loyal, devoted, and loving as before, then she truly loves you. Otherwise, she will only look down on you. I never expected her words to become prophecy. Suddenly, I remembered the year my family went bankrupt. I sat on the steps, crying my heart out. Luviana walked over and tightly pulled me into her arms. She cried as well, her heart aching for me. Patrick, don't cry, don't cry. From now on, as long as Luviana is here, I'll take care of you. Chapter 15. After the meeting ended, Grace came to find me. Her face was pale, her expression complicated. Patrick, you're President Morales' son. Why didn't you tell me? I looked at her coldly. Do you need something? Grace's face turned even paler. She looked up at me, her voice carrying a hint of pleading. I know I was wrong. She reached out to grab my sleeve, but I subtly avoided her touch. Patrick, I was deceived by that bastard Anthony. Could you give me another chance? I still love you. I don't want to lose you, I sneered. Grace, if Anthony really were President Morales' son and I weren't, would you still be saying these things to me? Grace froze instantly, unable to say a single word. In the end, she and Anthony left the company in disgrace. Several of Grace's close followers also tactfully submitted their resignations. Of course, a few people chose to stay. I handed their names over to the new general manager, Sean. A new official always likes to make a show of authority, and he was just worrying about who to make an example of. After receiving the list, he hurriedly expressed his gratitude to me. Simon was transferred by me to take a position at the group headquarters. As for the other trusted subordinates I had personally trained, I arranged them all into key positions. Anthony really did have a knack for being a kept man. Not long after leaving the company, he latched onto a rich woman again. Coincidentally, I happened to know that rich woman's husband. I merely made a casual remark. Anthony's third leg was broken, and it looked like he wouldn't be touching women for the rest of his life. Grace was fired from the company, leaving a stain on her resume. No major company wanted her anymore. Later, I heard she became a manager at a small company. But she didn't hold that position for long before getting entangled with her boss. The boss's wife was a mid-tier internet influencer, not someone to mess with. She live-streamed herself in the street with her group of girlfriends, publicly tearing apart the mistress. The buzz skyrocketed, quickly shooting to the top of the trending charts. Rubbernecking netizens dug up all of Grace's information. Her family and relatives were dragged into it as well, none were spared. Grace became famous overnight. Countless netizens pointed fingers at her, hurling insults and curses. That day, I happened to pass by. I had the driver stop the car and rolled down the window, watching for quite a while. Grace saw me too. The woman who had been screaming hysterically suddenly fell silent. She let a group of shrews beat and insult her. Biting her lip tightly, tears streamed down her face. I lost interest in watching any longer and told the driver to leave. In the end, Luviana and I entered the Hall of Marriage. 3 years later, my mother's health declined and she chose to step down. I officially took control of the entire Red Bull group.